Officer rescues abandoned black baby, faces heartbreaking revelation years later. The rain fell heavily on the dark streets of a rundown neighborhood. Officer John Harris, a white man in his 40s, drove slowly in his patrol car, his eyes scanning the empty sidewalks and shadowy alleys. John had been a cop for many years. He cared about people and wanted to make things right, but sometimes his job felt hard and thankless. As John turned a corner, he heard something faint over the rain. He stopped the car and listened. There it was again, a weak cry. John got out and walked towards the sound. It seemed to come from behind a dumpster in an alley. John's heart beat faster as he approached. The cry grew clearer, and it sounded like a baby. He shone his flashlight behind the dumpster. John gasped. There, wrapped in a thin blanket, was a tiny black baby. The poor thing shivered in the cold and wet. "Oh my God," John whispered. He quickly picked up the baby, holding it close to warm it with his free hand. He called for an ambulance on his radio. John felt shocked and sad. Who would leave a helpless baby like this? As John waited for help, he looked at the baby's face. Memories of his own children as babies came back to him. John had found being a dad very hard. He and his wife had split up years ago. John didn't see his kids as much as he wanted to. But now, holding this abandoned child, John felt something stir inside him. A need to protect, a desire to make things right. For the first time in years, John felt truly needed. He had a chance to make a real difference. John gently rocked the baby, talking softly to comfort it. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now. I've got you." The baby's cry softened. John felt the small body relax in his arms. In that moment, John's doubts about his job melted away. This was why he became a cop, to help people who couldn't help themselves, to stand up for those with no voice. John silently promised the baby he would do everything he could to give it a good life. The sound of sirens grew louder. Help was almost here. John knew his role in the baby's life would soon end, but he would never forget this night. It had awakened something in him that had been sleeping for too long. John was ready to be the officer and the man he had always wanted to be. As the ambulance pulled up, John felt a mix of relief and reluctance. He knew the baby needed medical care, but he didn't want to let go. The paramedics rushed over with a stretcher. "Found this little one behind a dumpster," John told them, his voice shaky. "No sign of parents." The paramedics nodded grimly. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, reached for the baby. "We'll take good care of the child." Officer John hesitated, then carefully handed over the baby. He watched as they wrapped the infant in warm blankets and checked its vital signs. The paramedic smiled at John. "Thanks to you, this baby has a chance. You did good, officer." Her words hit John hard. He blinked back tears as he watched them load the baby into the ambulance. As the vehicle drove away, its lights flashing in the rain, John stood there feeling dazed. He got back in his patrol car but didn't start it right away. John sat there replaying the events in his mind. The baby's cry, the feeling of holding that tiny, vulnerable life, the rush of protectiveness he had felt. John thought about his own kids. He hadn't been there for them like he should have. Work always came first, but now he saw things differently. That baby had awakened something in him, a desire to do better, to be better. He started the car and began driving to the hospital. John knew he should get back to his patrol, but he couldn't. He needed to know the baby would be okay. At the hospital, John found the emergency room busy with late-night cases. He showed his badge to a nurse. "I'm here about the abandoned baby that just came in. How is it doing?" The nurse checked her computer. "The baby is stable. We're running tests now." "Are you the officer who found it?" John nodded. "Can I see the baby?" The nurse hesitated, then saw the concern in John's eyes. "Okay, but just for a minute." She led John to a small room. The baby lay in a special warming bed, hooked up to monitors. It looked so small and alone. John's heart ached. "It's a boy," the nurse told him. "About 3 months old. He's undernourished but otherwise seems healthy." John stood by the bed, watching the baby's chest rise and fall. He gently touched the tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around John's finger. As John left the hospital, he felt different, lighter, like a fog had lifted. For years, he had just been going through the motions at work and at home. But now he had a purpose again. John couldn't stop thinking about the baby he had rescued. He called the hospital every day to check on the boy's progress. After a week, the nurse told him some news that hit him hard. "No relatives have come forward to claim him," she said. "He'll be going into foster care soon." John felt a mix of sadness and determination. He made up his mind right then. "I want to foster him," he said. The nurse sounded surprised. "That's wonderful, but it's not a simple process, especially since you're a single white man wanting to foster a black child." John finished. "I know it won't be easy, but I have to try." John dove into the foster process. He filled out piles of paperwork, went to classes on foster parenting, and had interviews with social workers. Many of them looked doubtful when they saw him. "Are you sure you're prepared for this?" one social worker asked, raising an eyebrow. Raising a child of a different race comes with unique challenges. John nodded firmly. "I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to give this boy a good home." After months of effort, John finally got approval. He went to pick up the baby, his heart pounding with excitement and nerves. When the social worker placed the boy in his arms, John felt that same rush of protectiveness he had felt on that rainy night. "Hello, Isaiah," John said softly. He had chosen the name carefully, wanting something with strength and meaning. "I'm going to take care of you." The first few months were hard. John was exhausted from long nights with a crying baby. He worried constantly if he was doing things right, but slowly he and Isaiah found their rhythm. As Isaiah grew from a baby to a toddler, John realized he had a lot to learn. He read books on Black history and culture. He asked his Black colleagues for advice. He wanted to make sure Isaiah grew up proud of who he was. John enrolled Isaiah in a daycare with a diverse group of kids and teachers. He took him to community events celebrating Black culture. When Isaiah was old enough, John signed him up for African American history classes at the local community center. Sometimes, John felt out of place at these events, but he pushed past his discomfort. This wasn't about him. It was about giving Isaiah connections to his heritage. As the years passed, John and Isaiah's bond grew stronger. They had their routines, breakfast together every morning, bedtime stories every night. John loved watching Isaiah's personality develop. The boy was curious, kind, and had a great sense of humor. When Isaiah was 6, John took him on their first fishing trip. They sat in a small boat on a quiet lake. John showed Isaiah how to bait the hook and cast the line. "Like this, Dad?" Isaiah asked, flinging his line into the water. John's heart swelled at the word Dad. Isaiah had started calling him that recently, and it still felt amazing every time. "That's perfect, buddy," John said with a smile. They didn't catch any fish that day, but as they sat together talking and laughing, John knew this was a moment he would always treasure. The holidays were always special times for John and Isaiah. They had their traditions, picking out a Christmas tree together, making Thanksgiving dinner for John's fellow officers who didn't have family nearby. One Christmas Eve, as they hung ornaments on their tree, Isaiah got quiet. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "do you think my birth parents ever think about me on Christmas?" John's heart ached. He knelt down to look Isaiah in the eye. "I'm sure they do, son, and I want you to know that it's okay to wonder about them. It doesn't change how much I love you." Isaiah hugged John tight. "I love you too, Dad," he said. As Isaiah got older, John had to help him face some hard realities. When Isaiah was 10, he came home from school looking upset. "What's wrong, buddy?" John asked. Isaiah hesitated, then said, "Some kids at school said you can't really be my dad because we don't match." John felt a flash of anger, but he kept his voice calm. "Isaiah, family isn't about matching skin. It's about love, and you are my son in every way that matters." They talked for a long time that night. The boy's anger seemed to deflate, replaced by confusion and pain. But the moment they had together was important. One day, while shopping at a store, John noticed a security guard following Isaiah closely. John's police instincts kicked in. He knew what was happening. John put his arm around Isaiah's shoulders and stared the guard down until he walked away. Later in the car, John explained to Isaiah what had happened. Isaiah looked angry and hurt. "But I wasn't doing anything wrong." "I know, son," John said sadly. "Sometimes people make unfair judgments based on skin color. It's not right and it's not your fault." They had a long talk about how to handle situations like this. John hated that Isaiah had to learn these lessons, but he was determined to prepare his son for the world he would face. It wasn't all serious talks and hard lessons, though. John and Isaiah had plenty of fun together, too. They went to basketball games, cheering on their favorite team. They had movie nights where they quoted their favorite lines to each other. They worked on Isaiah's science fair projects together, making messes and laughing. As John looked at the young man Isaiah had become, he felt overwhelmed with love and pride. That tiny baby he had found on a rainy night had grown into a smart, compassionate person. John knew they would face more challenges in the future, but he also knew that the bond between them was unbreakable. John thought back to that night so many years ago. He had thought he was rescuing Isaiah, but the truth was that Isaiah had rescued him too. This boy had given John's life new purpose and meaning. Whatever the future held, John knew they would face it together. One day, John was walking out of the police station after his shift when a man approached him. The stranger looked nervous, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Officer Harris," the man said in a low voice. "I'm Leroy. I need to talk to you about Isaiah." John felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't told many people about Isaiah's background. "What about Isaiah?" he asked cautiously. Leroy leaned in closer. "That night you found him, it wasn't random. There's more to the story, dangerous stuff." John's heart raced. "What do you mean? How do you know about this?" But Leroy was already backing away. "I've said too much. Just be careful. The past has a way of catching up with you." And he disappeared into the crowd. John stood there, stunned. The encounter left him shaken and full of questions. He had always wondered about the circumstances of Isaiah's abandonment. Now it seemed there might be darker secrets lurking in his son's past. That night, John couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Leroy's words. The next day, John ran into Isaiah's guidance counselor at the grocery store. Mrs. Thompson pulled him aside, concern in her eyes. "Isaiah seems very troubled lately," she said. "He's withdrawn in class, and his grades are slipping. Is everything okay at home?" John explained the situation as best he could without revealing too much. Mrs. Thompson listened sympathetically. "It's a difficult situation," she said, "but Isaiah is lucky to have a father who cares so much. Give him time. He'll come around." John hoped she was right, but as more time passed, he began to fear he had lost Isaiah for good. The son he had raised, the bond they had formed over the years of love and trust, had it all been destroyed by this revelation? One evening, John came home from work to find Isaiah sitting on the front steps. His heart leapt, but he approached cautiously. "Hey!" John said softly. "It's good to see you." Isaiah looked up, his expression a mix of sadness and uncertainty. "Can we talk?" he asked. John nodded, sitting down next to Isaiah but giving him space. "Of course. I'm always here to listen." Isaiah took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, "about my mom, about you, about who I am." John listened, curious where this was going. "I used to think family was all about blood," Isaiah continued. "But now I know it's about love, about choice. My birth mom fought to give me a better life. You became a cop to protect people. And now I'm finding my own way to make a difference." John felt his heart swell with pride and love. "You're an amazing young man, Isaiah. Your mother would be so proud of you." Isaiah smiled, a hint of tears in his eyes. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." As Isaiah's senior year of high school progressed, their relationship grew stronger than ever. They still had disagreements, of course, but now they faced them together with honesty and respect. The youth program they started began to take off. Kids who might have fallen through the cracks were finding support and mentorship. John and Isaiah worked side by side, each bringing their strengths to the project. Before they knew it, it was time for Isaiah's high school graduation. As John sat in the audience, watching Isaiah walk across the stage to receive his diploma, he felt overwhelmed with emotion. He thought back to that rainy night so many years ago when he found a tiny baby abandoned behind a dumpster. He remembered the fear and uncertainty he felt becoming a single father, especially to a child of a different race. He thought of all the challenges they had faced together over the years, and now here was Isaiah, strong, compassionate, and ready to take on the world. John couldn't have been prouder if Isaiah had been his flesh and blood. After the ceremony, John made his way through the crowd to find Isaiah. When he spotted him, surrounded by friends and beaming with pride, John's heart felt like it might burst. Isaiah saw him approaching and broke away from his friends. "Dad!" he called out, rushing over to hug John tightly. "Congratulations, son," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you." Isaiah pulled back, his eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." John smiled, blinking back tears. "That's what fathers do." Isaiah nodded, suddenly looking serious. "You know, I've been thinking about that car you promised me for graduation." John laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Nice try, kiddo. How about we start with dinner to celebrate?" Isaiah grinned. "Deal, as long as you're buying." As they walked to the car, joking and planning their celebration, John felt grateful for every moment of their journey together. The hard times had made the good times even sweeter, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, father and son, bound by a love stronger than blood.